You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. Force 13 live, it's 10 PM in the Philippines and we are currently tracking Typhoon Yutu, which is continuing to approach Luzon. Now a category 3, it would appear that the JTWC will be going with 125 miles per hour in their next advisory. To be honest, it looks a little bit weaker than that looking at those latest images. The storm not looking particularly good at this time. My name's Nathan Foy. I am still pretty ill, as you can hear, so you'll have to bear with that for this hour or however long we'll be here for. Just me at the helm at this time. You can see the storm's location there on this graphic, which I believe is actually issued from the CPHC on behalf of the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, an interesting one. The storm expected to make landfall in about 30 hours, I think, something like that. So you're looking at the overnight hours Monday night into Tuesday morning for its potential landfall in the Philippines, and a high chance of tropical storm conditions for a lot of Luzon at this time, with, I think, on those probability graphics earlier we were looking at something like, let's just take a look back at them again if we can. Where have they gone? Scrolling all the way back here, you can see very near 100% chances in a lot of those places already. Further south, places like Manila, around 40%, which is certainly significant. Higher percentages than I think we gave for Mangkut, I think. And then you look further north, some other locations further up there as well. Even along the western coast, you could be seeing significant winds, but obviously very heavy rains as well. You've got the mountainous areas, two banks of mountains in Luzon, in the northern half there. There will be huge amounts of rain falling on those higher elevation areas. Some model indications showing it could be as high as 60 or 70 inches, which is in the region of trying to figure out what that is in millimeters. It's a lot. Well over 1,000, could be over 2,000. But that is obviously in some of those isolated locations. Further down, you'll be looking at much lower amounts of rainfall, maybe up to about 250 millimeters or so. 10 inches. That's at the lower elevations. And of course those strong winds, and I doubt storm surge is going to be one of the biggest issues considering what the terrain profile is like on the eastern coast of the Philippines there. But yeah, it's going to be a little bit like Mangkut. It's not going to be as strong as that, but of course an area that's already been hit by a storm is probably made twice as vulnerable. So obviously we are quite concerned. What has struck me as interesting is that Pagasa are only talking about issuing warnings tomorrow morning, which I'm a bit surprised, because it's about 300 miles, just over 300 miles from the closest point of land on the Philippines. So that's not very far away. I mean, given the storm's size, it's almost there already. In fact, if we could just take a look at that satellite imagery again, you'd be able to see just how close the storm's influence is from land, and you could argue it's already over the Philippines actually. Let's just take a look again here. Look at these latest frames, and you can see on the western side of the storm there, one of those bands, one of those very early peripheral nothing to it bands, is now over the Philippines. So by one definition you could say that the storm's already here. Obviously, by any definition that you'd consider important, the storm is still some distance away. But it struck me as curious that they're not going to issue the Signal 1 warnings until tomorrow, which I'm not sure that's happened. That has been their usual protocol until now. Maybe someone will correct me on that. If you've got any questions or comments for us whilst we're on the air in this hour, send us a message. Start your message with Force 13, all in text, and it will light up big and bright nicely for me. And as soon as I see anything there, then I'll obviously respond. The first question is actually about Oscar, which is the other system that we've got active at the moment, not in the Western Pacific, but in the Atlantic Ocean. So let's just quickly grab a look at Oscar, which is on the cusp of reaching hurricane status, apparently. Well, the National Hurricane Center think it will happen in the next 12 hours. Here it is. So you can see the latest imagery of Oscar. Tiny is the first word that comes to mind. Looking at its wind field, it actually is a little bit bigger than that convective burst there. The wind field is about, let's see, 80 nautical miles in the northeastern quadrant and 100 nautical miles in the northwestern quadrant, which is quite a bit bigger than the convection would have you think. Of course, it has been undergoing the transition to tropical storm. It is now a tropical storm after it started life again, another subtropical storm in the Atlantic. And it's surrounded by just a big chunk of dry air to the west, but as that storm rounds the corner and turns towards the north, this could become a significant hurricane, could get to Category 2 perhaps. The National Hurricane Center think it will get to 85 miles per hour on their forecast, but there is a lot of room for further intensification on that. So, yeah, there's still a lot to be said about Oscar, although it is not likely to affect any land areas, and that's why we're really only giving it minimal coverage during this feature tonight. Again, back at those latest images of Yutu. Obviously the Philippine name is Rosita. Let's just investigate what has been going on in that storm's eye recently. It hasn't been looking very good, has it? As a matter of fact, let's just see if we can get... Yes, this is a more longer loop. And you can see what's been happening in those last... how long's this been going on for? Something like 4 hours of imagery here. So, at the beginning of that imagery, you can see on the left side there, the western side of the storm, there was still that very strong part of the eye wall. Some of it was in the -70s. And actually, I just want to get more of a... context on this. Let's go back 24 hours. Hopefully we can on here. Otherwise it won't make for such a good show. Okay, we're slowly getting that imagery. We'll come back to that imagery shortly. In the meantime, there's some model runs. The CMC out on a limb there, taking it towards Vietnam now. Oh god, I don't think that's going to happen. If we just go back to that, a lot of the other models taking it on various degrees of recurvature. Which is that green model there? That's the NavGem, I think. Taking it, recurving it pretty early. And then you've got the GFS, the red line. And by the looks of things, it's almost a direct correlation between how far south this storm makes landfall in the Philippines and when that recurve happens. The further it digs south, the later the recurve is likely to be. So those watching from Taiwan and Hong Kong and places like that, that's something really to bear in mind, because you can see there are a few different scenarios being played out. Some of the edges of the ensembles there, taking it as far west as Hainan as a landfall and then curving towards the northeast. And then you've got others. There's actually one or two ensembles there that take it through the Calayan Islands. and then off towards eastern Taiwan. So that would be a crazy scenario, certainly not the consensus. The consensus is a landfall on Isabela province in the Philippines, and then a recurvature in the South China Sea, possibly a landfall in China, or in western Taiwan, or in between the two, going through the gap, and somehow, somewhere eventually ending up in the East China Sea, probably turn post-tropical by then because that's the time of year, and then what's left of it will end up sweeping through either Japan or South Korea. So that is just a glimpse of that one. Alright, let's see if we can investigate again just how the storm has been developing, or you might want to say capitulating, in the last 24 hours. This is going to be a fascinating loop. So you can see here, this is how it looked 24 hours ago, yesterday. And you can see there the cloud tops, the pink areas denoting -80, maybe even getting towards -90 cloud tops in that. The colder the cloud tops, that's the temperature in Celsius in the -80s there. The coldest cloud tops correspond to more convection, which obviously indicates a more intense storm. And we also watch out for the eye temperature in the middle there. A warmer eye equals a more intense storm usually. The eye temperature was 2 degrees above freezing 24 hours ago. Let's see how it progressed. There it is going throughout the night into the morning in the Philippines, and you can see how it looked early on in the morning today. The eye temperature had gone up a little bit, but that was up to about 13, but at the expense of those cloud tops, and the cloud tops looked pretty abominable compared to what they were earlier. The coldest cloud tops there about -76, but at least you still had -70 cloud tops wrapping around most of the storm. And now we get up to the present, and those latest images, well, we didn't have that one, there it is. Hardly any -70 cloud tops now. The eye is still in decent condition. Well, I say the temperature alone, the eye itself is looking shocking, and you can see a massive gap in the eastern side, in the eastern side of that eye wall, as has been the case for a long time. And it's been going through eye wall replacement cycle after eye wall replacement cycle, and it's been failing, flunking all of them, and it's sort of got bits and pieces of 10 different eye walls now, probably, since its passage through Tinian. And now en route to the Philippines, it's looking worse than ever. Although, having said that, worse than ever still means Category 3 on the Saffir-Simpson scale, and that is still a very intense storm. It still could be very damaging. It's not a Category 5. It's not Mangkhut. But it could be worse than Mangkhut because it's still carrying a strong storm surge. If it goes further south, you know, towards Metro Manila, it's certainly going to land, well, maybe not certainly, but it's looking pretty likely that it's going to land further south than Mangkhut did. So obviously that's an increased risk to a higher population from the beginning. Although it will be a little bit weaker, but I think the tropical storm force winds will still be felt over a larger area. This storm does have a pretty large wind field. I haven't been looking at the exact dimensions right now. I know that it's roughly, it used to be 200 nautical miles. I'll go and find it out, where you can see a depiction on that graphic there. The yellow area is the tropical storm force wind. It's larger than Luzon itself by the looks of it. So it certainly is a very large wind field. I can tell you now that it is actually 240 nautical miles in the northwestern quadrant, extending outwards. That is probably about 350 to 400 kilometers. And that is just in one direction from the center of the storm. In its opposing direction in the southeast, it's another 145 nautical miles. In the northeast, it's 200, and in the southwest, it's 160. So given how the storm was 381 miles from Santa Ana as of an hour ago when we did that computation, you know, it's not going to be particularly long until tropical storm force winds get felt there. Alright, let's see if we've got any more questions. I'm sure we will by now. I have been going on for quite a little bit here. Let's see. How does one join Force 13 is one interesting question we have there. Well, there are many different ways to get involved. There are many different kinds of roles that we're looking for people to fulfill if they are available. You can send us a message through email, contact@force13.com. I think it appears at the bottom of the screen every so often. Well, there it is, contact@force13.com. That is the email address. And on Facebook and Twitter, you can see those links there. And also on Skype and Discord, Fool13 at extension 9094 on Discord. You also can join the, we have a Discord server on there as well, where you can discuss topics with other storm trackers. Let's see, what do you think oh god, we're already talking about 2019 now in the comments. What do you think the 2019 hurricane season will look like, active or not, or is it too early to tell? I've got an inkling we're heading into a little El Nino period, which would indicate a busier than average southern hemisphere season this winter, this summer as it is down there. And that could lead to a weaker Atlantic season in 2019, unless that El Nino is stopped in its tracks and it reverts back to a neutral, and then it's anyone's guess again. So we'll wait and see on that one. It'll be very interesting to see how things develop over the winter time when we're looking at those sea surface temperatures. It also means a lot for the West Pacific as well. If we do see a significant El Nino developing, it's usually a harbinger of significant typhoon activity in the first half of the year. So the Philippines may not get a break if an El Nino comes about right now. Is it a subtropical storm or a tropical storm? I assume you're referring to Oscar. Oscar is a tropical storm. It became tropical earlier this morning. Do you think Yutu will intensify more in the next 24 hours before landfall? I'll answer that question in a moment. Let's see. What else do we have? How do you get to West Pacific on Hurricane Center? I'm not sure I understand the question. Now, the National Hurricane Center doesn't do the Western Pacific, but I believe the Central Pacific Hurricane Center created that graphic that that every so often we show on behalf of the Joint Typhoon Warning Center. Also, of course, Guam have a National Weather Service office, and they produce their own graphics on typhoons as well that we don't show on here, just for your consideration. Excuse me. Let's see. Okay, so a lot of people asking about Yutu's forecasted and predicted strength. So I'm going to show you some sort of model spread, what they're going to say about this storm intensity-wise. I'm just going to get this up on the screen. It will take a moment or two. One of my favorite graphics that I use is this one. It's a little bit cut off, I'm afraid. Hopefully you'll be able to understand it. So the top left panel there is the intensity forecast. So you can see it drops down a cliff there from what is category 4 in the grey area down to tropical storm in the lower grey area. That, of course, is for the Philippine landfall. The HWRF just about keeps it as a typhoon, I think. But you can see there, most models do agree with slight re-intensification in the South China Sea. Additionally, the Joint Typhoon Warning Center doesn't think it will get below category 2 after it makes landfall, but all the models think it will drop to at least category 1, so that's an interesting point. What you will notice quite worryingly on the top right hand panel, that's the wind shear graphic, and as you can see, the models agree that wind shear is going to drop substantially in the next 12 hours. So now or never, basically, for Typhoon Yutu on any strengthening that it might do. It really looks appalling on satellite imagery, so re-intensification certainly hasn't started yet. But if it's going to happen at any time, it's going to be in the next 24 hours that we'll see some re-intensification. You saw the wind shear earlier was up to about 25 knots, which is, you know, it rips a storm apart at that intensity, dropping to near nil. So, you know, it's not going to be an issue. Sea surface temperatures remaining fairly warm and warming up a little bit again, up to around 28 or 29 degrees Celsius. The only thing that might stop it is more dry air. You see the bottom right hand graphic there, that's the mid-level relative humidity. It's been pretty low recently. You saw how it was up in the 70s when the storm was striking the Mariana Islands. Since then it's gone down to the 40s, maybe even the high 30s, and that means that dry air is a significant issue for this storm at this time. And most of the storm's weakening has been due to failed eye wall replacement cycles, and dry air has exacerbated that problem as well. Let me see if we can get a graphical depiction of that. Looking at the mid-level water vapor imagery, here's what it looks like right now. Zoom out a little bit, let's see what the environment around the storm looks like. Any of those yellow areas signals dry air, and you can see the storm is pretty much surrounded by dry air. Obviously, because a typhoon is very much a fountain of moisture, you could call it, it really is enemy of dry air. And as you can see there on the right hand side, little bits of it there, which could have, and you can see even within the storm's core, a massive dry air slot there on the eastern side of the storm's eye. It's been a bane on the storm's existence for about 3 or 4 days now, because the northeastern side of the eye wall has been open the whole time by the looks of things, according to satellite, and it's never gotten over that. And that is probably the reason why we've seen gradual continued weakening, because the storm has just never got to grips with closing off the eye wall again after it first happened, which is when it first had the eye wall replacement cycle after its massive peak. Let's see, what else do we have? The chance of tropical conditions in Hong Kong. Good question. I'll be able to answer that question in just a minute. Do you think the Pacific will be even more energetic next year? If it's an El Nino, yes. Or if you mean the West Pacific. East Pacific, maybe. Maybe not. It's been pretty busy there. And do you think the Atlantic was an active season or an inactive season? Well, strictly speaking, we got to O. We're at least at O so far. So that means an active season. Yeah, I'd say it's been an active season. Florence and Michael pretty much does it, doesn't it? Alright, back to that question about... I'll go through a few of the other areas outside of the Philippines for tropical storm force wind probabilities. Whilst I look at that, we'll bring onto the screen again the wind speed probabilities in the Philippines, which look like that. Excuse me. And okay, so chances of tropical storm force winds for a few of these locations, then a few other locations that I'm about to point out. Hong Kong then, about 37 or 38%, something like that, about 35 to 40% basically. Macau nearby, that's about 30% chance. Shantou in China, off to the east, that is about 30% at this time. Kaohsiung in Taiwan, that is roughly 15%. The eastern coast of Taiwan, in the south it's 10 to 15%, in the north it's less than 10%. The whole northern half of Taiwan actually is less than 10% at this time. That is over the next 5 days. Obviously, if the storm is to impact after 5 days, it of course won't show up here. And then that's pretty much all of them, really. Hainan Island, just over 10% on the eastern tip. But yeah, the main place there, Hong Kong, 35% chance of tropical storm conditions in the next 5 days. Manila is at roughly 40%. And another question as to whether we'll be able to make a comprehensive summary on Yutu later today or tomorrow. Well, I think this really is as comprehensive as it gets. I don't know what else you want, but if you got any questions, then we are here to serve. Let's see. Let's see if we can see any more satellite imagery at this time then. Where's that all gone? Of course, if you've got any more questions for us, do send us a message. Start your message with Force 13 all in text. It's 26 minutes past 10 in the Philippines. Okay, let's see if we can get another new image of the typhoon. Okay, that's quite close. Let's zoom out a little bit on that. I think this is pretty much up to date. So that latest image there, showing possibly a sign of the eye wall trying to get back, but I think that is just I'm losing my wording. Superficial, I think. I do believe that that gap there is still quite prominent in the northeastern side of the eye wall, but I must say I think it has looked a little bit better in those latest frames. Again, you use the southwestern side there. Looks like a bit of a flare-up in those cloud top temperatures. And obviously the cloud tops themselves flaring up there. But that's pretty much all I have at this time. The storm is moving closer towards the Philippines, roughly 380 miles from Santa Ana. What should be expected in Manila when the storm hits? At the minute I would expect, similar conditions to Mangkhut, probably slightly, maybe slightly worse than Mangkhut in Manila. That's if the storm moves as far south as we're currently predicting. It may not still. It is still at the same, almost at the same latitude as, I think it is the same latitude as Cagayan province. So it does have to sink south a little bit if it's going to get towards Isabela province, which is where we expect that landfall to occur. In the meantime, I think we're going to finish up here for the time being. Because I don't think my voice is going to hold out much longer, unfortunately. But I'll stay in the chat for a little while, and we'll continue to look at these pictures on the automated streaming service. Hope you found the update of interest, and we'll probably have more coverage later on. I think we'll have another update at 4 AM, and also we'll probably have more rolling coverage in the morning, Philippine time, after daybreak. That's all for me for now. Have a good night, and make sure you prepare for this storm all across Luzon, because tomorrow it's going to start to approach, and by tomorrow night it's really going to be upon you, delivering tropical storm force winds.